The La Belle Époque period is an extremely interesting time in our history, a time of great social, political, cultural, technological changes. A time where the great empires, the great powers of that time, tried to overcome their foes by diplomatic offensives, by securing the biggest possible number of allies. This was not a time of great wars, it was a time of great diplomatic struggle. And the game which I will be presenting you today recreates those events, giving us the possibility to become the most influential and the most important power of the La Belle Époque period. Hello, this is Michel Leviathan Sorbet, and this is a new episode of Wojennik TV. The La Belle Époque period was an extremely interesting period, which I already told you at the beginning of this video. And this is a period which is also the topic of one of the most interesting wargames which I covered on my channel some time ago. This is the topic of a game called La Belle Époque, released by Aleph Game Studio in 2020. This is a game designed by Paulo Carraro for 1 to 4 players, aged 12 or higher, with a time of play somewhere around 2 to 3 hours. This is a game which enables us to take control of one of the major powers of that time, of France, of the central powers of Germany and the Austrian Empire, of Russia, or of the United Kingdom. Our main objective will be to become the most influential, the most powerful empire before the First World War erupts. This game has also a solo mode, because what is interesting when it comes to La Belle Époque is that we can play this game several ways. We can play it with 4 human players. Each of the players will take control of one of the powers. We can play with 3 human players, with 2 human players. Then each player will take control of 1 or more powers, and we can also play using bots. We can play bots both solitaire, then we will be facing 3 different bots. We can play using bots in a group of 2 or 3 players. Each player will take control of only 1 major power, and the remaining powers will be controlled by artificial intelligence opponents. So we have several modes, and today during the game, during this review, I would like to show you how the components used for solo play look, what changes in comparison to the standard game, and at the end of this video, as usually, I'd like to give you my final thoughts concerning what I think about this solo mode. Do I believe this is a nice addition, an addition which should be taken into consideration if you're interested in acquiring La Belle Époque, especially for solo play? So let's dive right into it and let's take a look at how La Belle Époque solo works. Here is La Belle Époque prepared to play a new solo game. Now in La Belle Époque it is possible to use the bots which are included both while playing solitaire as well as when we play with 2 or 3 players. We can use the rules which are in the rulebook, saying that when we play with 2 players, we take control of 2 powers, or when we play with 3 players, one of the players will take control of 2 powers. But we can also stick to the rule that each player will take control of only of 1 power, and the missing ones will be controlled by the artificial intelligence. When it comes to the bot system or the solo system included in La Belle Époque, it is designed in such a way to interfere with the least possible way with the basic rules. So there are some differences concerning how we play, but they aren't extremely complicated. The first thing which deserves to be mentioned is the fact that while playing solo, we will be tracking points only for ourselves. we will not be counting points for our virtual opponents. So while scoring at the end of the third, the sixth, and maybe of the ninth turn, we will be adding only our own points, and in the end we will be comparing the amount of points accumulated with a certain benchmark included in the rulebook. So our objective will be to achieve the biggest possible number of points. The second difference is that when playing solo, we will be using the overside of the Empire's board, of the power boards, on which we will find specific information which are used during solo play. Now, as you can see, the reverse side of the power boards are different than the standard ones. We have a new table which indicates what our virtual opponent will be doing during each turn, indicating firstly how strong it will be, indicating its arsenal bonus in each of the 9 possible turns, indicating what kind of card our opponent will be playing against us or over virtual players, intrigue or national cards, and indicating also if our opponent increases its fleet power or if it moves on the prestige track. Now, tracking fleets is important only if you play the British, because this is tracked only in order to see if the British fulfill their objective. If you're playing an overpower, it's not necessary. But the prestige track will be important because it is possible for artificial intelligence players to unlock bonuses such as additional cubes or drawing additional cards. The second table on this part of the player board, or rather of the AI board, is the central big table indicating what are the priorities of placement of the diplomatic missions. Each power has its own separate table indicating what are the priorities, and those priorities are linked to the objectives which are present on the other side of this board. So for instance, it will be one of the objectives of a human player while playing the central powers to control Tanganyika. And as you can see, Tanganyika is also present on this side of the AI board, indicating that our AI opponent will be sending cubes to Tanganyika. So even though our opponent will not be gaining points, it will behave in such a way as if he wanted to accomplish the objectives of a human player playing this given power. We also receive an objectives table, which will be important in terms of placement or in terms of choosing the target of some of the actions, such as cards or such as armament cubes, because our virtual opponent will be also placing armament cubes starting from turn 4. The turn sequence is pretty much similar to what we receive in the base game, but there are some differences. The first phase is the resource phase, and now it's a phase which is played almost entirely by the human player, because our artificial intelligence opponents will not be tracking money. They can play units, they can play cards without paying for them, so money will be tracked only by the human players. Each power will also receive a corresponding number of cubes, and when receiving those cubes, they will be placing those cubes on the central part of their boards in each column, 1 cube each. Sometimes a power will receive additional cubes. For instance, the French will receive an additional cube starting from turn 4. Sometimes, due to the movement on the prestige track, a power can receive an additional cube. Such a cube is also always placed on the 3rd column. This is important in terms of where those cubes will be placed onto the map board, because after playing the resource phase, after resolving events just like we resolve them in the standard game, we pass to the intrigue cards when we draw cards both for us as well as for our virtual opponents, and we pass on to the action phase. Now, in contrast to standard play, human players will always act last, and we will be tracking turn order because human players will always play after artificial intelligence players, which will change turn order from turn to turn. So at the end of a given turn, the power which was first on the turn order will act last, but before human players. The order will change only for the non-human players. After passing to the action phase, in turn order, indicated by the standard turn order, each artificial intelligence power will execute their actions. And the first thing that we do is
play possibly an intrigue or a national card if such a power on a given turn does such an activity. Then we roll the die in order to see where the cubes will be placed. So we have 6 possibilities. A die roll indicates what will be the priorities. And in each row, we have 2 options. We have the first one, which is the first priority, and the secondary objective, which is taken into consideration only if the first priority is not possible to be used. It's not possible. Now, when a priority is not possible, our opponents will be trying to seize control of territories. So as long as an AI power doesn't control a territory, it will be sending cubes to it. So if, for instance, the Central Powers do not control Belgium, they will send their cube in order to try to take control. They will possibly also create a diplomatic dispute while trying to seize control of Belgium. But if the Central Powers already control Belgium, then they will send their cube to the second priority, in this scenario to Greece. The same applies to the second cube and to the third. As you can see in the third column, we have also some spaces where the final placement will be determined by a die roll. So for instance, if initially a 3 was rolled, then I would have to roll another die to see if the third cube should be placed in Namibia, Congo or Romania. And the secondary objective would be Spain. Those cubes are placed onto the board, sometimes causing diplomatic disputes. Our opponents will be always attacking the power who has the numerical superiority in a territory. So, for instance, if the Central Powers send cubes to Congo, and in Congo we have 3 British cubes and 1 French, they will be attacking the British. Of course, if it is a full territory, if there are any free spaces, it will be occupying free spaces. Firstly, AIs can also send armaments starting from turn 4 if the die roll of our priority is a 1 or a 5. In such a case, our virtual opponent will also send an armament cube or even 2 armament cubes, and the location where such cubes will be placed will be determined by the objectives table. Each AI power has its own objectives table, and in an order which is related to the number indicated on the objectives table, we will analyze each territory if such a territory is the one where armament cubes will be placed by the AI power. The territory where such cubes will be placed will be the territory in which placing such cubes can change the current situation, meaning that it can grant control to such a territory to the AI who sends those armaments, or it can cause an enemy power to lose control over such a territory. In those cases, the armaments will be placed. AIs play also cards, and as well as it was the case with armaments, sometimes the priorities of who to target, which territory to target, will be determined using the objectives table. Now, the last thing which is different in comparison to what we know from the base game is the way how diplomatic disputes are resolved. Because our enemies will not be using any armies or any fleets. They will be using a specific number of arsenal bonus, which will be tracked on the arsenal bonus tract, and it will increase from turn to turn. The final number, the final power of an arsenal bonus in each diplomatic dispute of each power will be determined by dividing the current turn's number arsenal bonus by the number of diplomatic disputes in which this power takes part. So for instance, if on turn 2 the Central Powers are taking part in 3 diplomatic disputes, their final arsenal bonus for each of those disputes will be +2. 6 divided by the number of diplomatic disputes, which is 3, gives us 2. So as you can see, for instance, on turn 8, the power will be significantly higher, but the maximum possible bonus is +4. So if, for instance, on turn 7, when the bonus would be 13, the Central Powers have only 1 diplomatic dispute to resolve, their bonus will be 4, which is the maximum possible. Diplomatic disputes are resolved only after each artificially intelligent power played its turn and after each human player played its turn. Only at this moment, as indicated on the sequence of play, diplomatic disputes will be resolved. Then we pass to the preparation phase, during which we prepare the game for a new turn, and we count the points if it is the end of turn 3, 6 or 9. The game, as well as it is the case in the standard game, can end due to sudden death if the event card of the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand is drawn. If the game ends earlier, the human player receives an additional bonus, an additional number of bonus points in order to compensate for this abrupt end. And in the end, we compare the number of points scored by the human player to the benchmark indicated in the rulebook. So to score an overwhelming victory, we have to have at least 110 victory points. Otherwise, it's a different outcome. That's it when it comes to the way how the solo mode for La Belle Époque works. Now it's time to pass to the last part of this video, during which I'd like to give you my final thoughts concerning this solo mode. I'd like to tell you what I liked in it and what I think are its weaker aspects.
La Belle Époque is a game which I really enjoyed. I played it several times, both in 2-player versions, in 3-player games, in 4-player games, and each time I played it, me and everyone which I played the game with enjoyed it a lot. This is a very interesting game with interesting mechanisms, with some clever ideas, at the same time covering such an interesting historical period that every player whom I presented this game enjoyed it a lot. I was so very interested how the solo mode of this game works, because as a great fan of solitaire games, as a great fan of games having a solo mode, I absolutely wanted to give it a try. And during this final part of the review, I'd like to tell you what I liked in this mode, but also what I think are its weaker points. Firstly, what deserves to be once more underlined is the fact that the rules of La Belle Époque, including the solo rules, are extremely well written. Now, this is something which I really want to underline, because I already recorded a few videos concerning games released by Aleph Game Studio, and each time I recorded them, I said that the rule books are badly written or extremely badly written. But La Belle Époque is a nice exception. The rulebook is greatly written and it is very understandable, it is very nicely presented, everything is fine in it. The language used is okay, you do not have any problems concerning how to start playing, where to find the most important information. And the same applies to the solo mode. And this is something which I really always enjoy, which I really always appreciate, when the rules are correctly written. So when it comes to this aspect, I must say that the solo mode is well explained. Secondly, what deserves also to be underlined, which I already mentioned, is the fact that I appreciate the fact, and I find it as a strong point of this system, that you can use the solo mode both while playing the game solo, as well as when playing in fewer than 4 players. You can attribute more than one power to a player, but you can also decide to include a bot, an artificial intelligence player to the game. And this is the way to do if you do not want one of the players to take control of several powers, to spend a lot of time thinking about how to behave, because controlling several powers is always something quite schizophrenic. Here it won't be necessary, you can use the bot. You can use also the artificial intelligence mode if you want to play solo. And this is something which I really appreciate. I believe that this is nicely done, this is nicely created, because not everyone will enjoy playing games in which he will have to take control of more than one power. So even having fewer than 4 players, you will still enjoy the game using the solo mode. The third thing, which I really like, is the fact that when designing the solo mode, the author and the company decided to preserve the most possible number of mechanisms which are part of the standard game. And when playing La Belle Époque solo, you really have the feeling that you are still playing the same game. This is something which I also very enjoyed, because I find it difficult sometimes to play solo modes for games in which a lot changes, in which I have the feeling of playing a totally different game from the standard one. Here, applying the rules which are present in the rulebook, telling us how to play for the solo players, makes us still play the same game. We still have the same impression of playing La Belle Époque. So the resource phase is preserved, even though the resources will be acquired only by the human player. The events phase is fully operational. You still apply the events which are drawn from the deck and you apply the results. The action phase looks very similar to the way how the standard action phase looks, with some very small differences concerning, for instance, when diplomatic conflicts are resolved. But apart from that, while playing La Belle Époque solo, you will have the feeling of still playing the same old good La Belle Époque. And this is also what I enjoyed. Finally, what I really like in this design, in the solo mode of this design, is the fact that the author included this priority table, which tells us on which parts of the world our virtual opponents will be focusing. And firstly, I think it is a clever idea in order to show you clearly what will be the main objectives of each artificial intelligence player. It is easier to understand what will be their purpose, what will be their objectives. At the same time, it's quite historical, because those objectives which are present on the solo mode players' sheets are in correspondence with what the powers they are representing tried to achieve historically. And this is something which I like. Firstly, it gives us a historical flair. Secondly, it also makes the moves done by our artificial intelligence opponents much more credible and much more sensible than in many solo modes in which movements are done randomly without any reason. Here it all has a reason, and this reason is this priority table which is printed on each power's sheet. So from this point of view, I think it's logical, it's also historical. It gives us the feeling that the moves made by our opponents are quite sensible and that they are trying to achieve something in the end. When trying to talk about the negative elements, the elements which I liked less, there will be three of them. The first one is the fact that while playing solo in La Belle Époque, we will be only trying to achieve the highest possible number of points, comparing it to the points included in the rulebook, which are a certain benchmark which we are trying to compare to. But I would really prefer to play against the overpowers, trying to receive more points than them. I would prefer to play against the powers than playing against a benchmark, against a given number of points which I'm trying to achieve. Of course, you can play from game to game trying to gain more points than earlier, but all the fun in La Belle Époque is trying to be better from the other powers. And while playing La Belle Époque solo gives you the same feeling during the game than as playing La Belle Époque in the standard way, in the end, you do not have this final feeling of being the best empire, of being the most powerful empire of the force which were part of the game. You have only the feeling that you managed to score a big number of points, allowing you to score an overwhelming victory. This is not the same, and I would really prefer to still compare my points against our virtual opponents. The second thing is that, in my opinion, the benchmark included in the rulebook is not a very high one. It's quite easy to achieve an overwhelming victory while playing La Belle Époque. And this is something which is related to the thing which I already mentioned while saying that I think is a good idea and a strong point of the game. The priorities. The priorities are interesting, they are sensible, they have a historical flair, but at the same time, those are incentives on which part of the world you should focus in order to gain the most possible number of benefits. This is due to the fact that when taking a look at all the opposing empires' sheets and seeing clearly where they will be placing their cubes and at what probability they will be placing their cubes, you can clearly see on which parts of the world you can focus quite safely without the danger of being constantly attacked, constantly cornered by opponents placing cubes from turn to turn. If you focus on parts of the world, such as for instance Spain, where enemy cubes will be very rarely placed, you can achieve great success and you can achieve high results without having to worry for being permanently attacked by your opponents. So as soon as you understand it, as soon as you see on which parts of the world you should focus, no matter what empire you are playing, your scores will skyrocket and it absolutely won't be a problem, absolutely won't be an issue to achieve overwhelming victories. So firstly, the game becomes quite predictable, and quite easy to play. The replay value, therefore, will be quite low because most games will look pretty much similar, of course with some differences, but still your main strategies will remain very similar. At the same time, you shouldn't have any problems of achieving an overwhelming victory. This leads me to a final conclusion, which is that the solo mode for La Belle Époque should be preferably used only when you are playing with fewer than 4 players, when you want to use an artificial intelligence opponent and not to attribute more than 1 power to a player. If you want to play the solo mode, you can treat it just as a training mode in order to see how well you can perform. But if you're looking for long-term campaign playing or using this solo mode more than a few times, this won't be for you because the games will be quite repetitive. At the same time, the level of difficulty won't be that high in order to motivate you in order to play over games. Having said that, I still believe that the fact that we have a solo mode in this game is a good addition. It enables you to use the solo mode from time to time if you want to see how you will perform or if you want to use it when playing with fewer than 4 players. From this point of view, it's still a very worthy, quite interesting mode. This was the review of the solo mode of La Belle Époque, released by Aleph Game Studio. Thank you a lot for watching this video. I invite you also to take a look at other videos on my channel. Take also a look at my Facebook and my Instagram. Have a great day and see you next time.